But Gary,
look, we're already 40 minutes in. Like we haven't even gotten to the meat. I just gave you the two, like I said, intake questions where I could kind of pick your brain.
Know, Gary. The next question's like the doozy.
The next one's like an hour long in and of itself, right? And I did some good research on this, and I donate to a charity called Billion Bibles, and of all the communist countries, Cuba is actually the most friendly to Christians. I learned that.
That's not true.
Well, let's get into it. I'll read the next question.
One, they're all friendly to Christians, Gary. But
we're gonna get into that.
Do you want to say the question, because it's a long question? And just go, Gary. Go for the question.
Okay. Why is communism so hostile towards Christians? One communist country after another has atrocities towards Christians. Do you want me to get into all the details? Do you want me to read the whole thing?
I mean, I might reference it if that's okay in my answer.
Okay.
If you don't want to go through the whole thing, I understand that. Because you give a lot of examples. So yeah, you don't have to, because there might be some I reference though. So you know what I'm talking about at least.
Okay.
I will say up front that I think this question is like completely off base for a variety of reasons. For example, one of the examples you use is the Tianjin massacre. The Tianjin massacre happened in 1870, and that was 80 years before the CPC gained power in China, and 50 years before the CPC was even created.
Fair point. I didn't even think of that. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I didn't even think of that.
I do wonder about your research, Gary. I do think maybe you just went to Wikipedia and went like Chinese atrocities against Christians, and like you're like, oh man.
No, I've had these for years. Like these, this is not new material I came up with this past week. Okay. No, that's a fair point. You're right. I didn't even consider. I just, yeah, that's a fair point.
I don't know how we can blame communists for that one. But anyways, where am I at? Because I wrote a lot, so I might. If I start reading and it gets dry, Gary, don't be afraid to cut in here. And also, like, I know personally of churches that have gone to China, churches that have gone to Cuba, Christians that have gone to these countries, and nothing of what you're reporting and what I know other NGOs have reported and think tanks have reported of repression against Christians, especially in China, because obviously China is like the huge one. But you mentioned Cuba, which I'll get into, because I feel like that was really that. I want to know where you got that, Gary, to be quite honest, because I haven't seen anything like that in all of my research and my personal direct and indirect experience with the island. Like it's that's just not the case. And again, like I know of churches that are big mega church corporations, right, that I don't like. And I know Gary probably doesn't like to some degree, right, in terms of how they've commodified, right, the religion, so to speak. But they go and have churches in China without state repression of any sort. And I've even had pastors come back, and I know from my partner and such that like they've said nothing but great things about China and actually want to move back to the country. So the idea that China's like deeply repressing Christians, and all my personal experience, that's not the case. The idea of Cuba saying that Christians are a disease, like that's I don't know where that comes from. I've never seen that before. But let's tackle that first aspect, the hostility towards Christians, right? The idea that communism itself is hostile towards Christians. I think that largely comes from Karl Marx and his opinions about the Catholic Church and wanting the abolition of organized religion in that sense. Never, by the way, for the idea of the elimination of spirituality or personal faith at all, but just the idea of banning the Catholic Church. That was very much a Karl Marx idea, because his own family was forced to convert from Judaism to Christianity. So he had very negative viewpoints of Protestantism and Catholicism. But communists and socialists actually in many parts of the world have been very much Christian. I don't know if Gary is quite aware of what's called liberation theology, but this was a Christian theology that was developed I want to say after there was this massive meeting of bishops and archbishops, like in 1968, I believe, in Medellin, Colombia, if I'm accurate there. And they basically had this referendum or statement that prioritizes the poor. The idea of we as a faith, we as a church, we as a society need to uplift the poor. And Gustavo, hold on, let me get Gustavo Gutierrez is his name. I highly recommend people read his work, A Theology of Liberation, History, Politics, and Salvation. You can read it for free on archive.org. I'll post it in the chat for anyone. Highly recommend it. And also for archive.org, for those who don't know, you can basically borrow PDFs for 2 weeks and just have a free account. Doesn't charge you anything. Very, very convenient. But anyways, this basically took hold over all socialist and communist movements, especially Latin America. Cuba for one, but especially the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas, quote from, let me get the exact, the National Director of the FSLN, published October 7th, 1980. Christian patriots and revolutionaries are an integral part of the Sandinista People's Revolution, and they have been for many years. The participation of Christians, both lay people and clergy, in the FSLN and the government of national reconstruction is a logical outgrowth of their outstanding participation at the people's side throughout the struggle against the dictatorship. And there's more works in this work. Sandinista Speaks is curated, so to speak, by one of the founders of the Sandinistas. Highly recommend that one as well. I'll post in the chat. But this idea that communists are antithetical to religion or to Christianity, I think it's just not accurate when we see it in practice, especially even in our own country, Gary. I know you're probably not aware of this, but in large part, the Chicano movement, the Latin demographics and their struggle for political and economic determination in this country is in large part founded under liberation theology. One of our veteran party members, a mentor of mine, one of the founders of the Chicano moratorium movement here in LA in 1970, he himself has an office in a church, that's his little communist office. So my own personal experience, from what I know of the Sandinistas, especially, the idea that Christians aren't accepted in this movement is just not true. I also have a bunch of other things I just want to rattle off here, if that's okay. Freedom of religion has been a right in every socialist society. In Cuba's constitution, Article 55, the state which recognizes, respects, and guarantees freedom of conscience and religion simultaneously recognizes, respects, and guarantees the freedom of every citizen to change religious creeds or not to have any, and to profess the religious worship of their choice with respect for the law. Article 124 of the USSR 1936 Constitution, which is often called Stalin's Constitution. Obviously, Stalin being the big bad boogeyman. In order to ensure to citizens freedom of conscience, the church in the USSR is separated from the state and the school from the church. Freedom of religious worship and freedom of anti-religious propaganda is recognized for all citizens. Article 36 of the People's Republic of China's Constitution. Citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of religious belief. No state, organ, public organization, or individual may compel citizens to believe in or not to believe in any religion, nor may they discriminate against citizens who believe in or do not believe in any religion. The state protects normal religious activities. No one may make use of religion to engage in activities that disrupt public order, impair the health of citizens, or interfere with the educational system of the state. Religious bodies and religious affairs are not subject to any foreign domination. It's also important to understand the church. And I'm going to use that in a capital C sense, Gary, so you can understand the organized Christian church, whether it be Catholic, Eastern, Orthodox, Baptist, whatever, right? Not the idea of, the colloquial, the Church of God is the people, right? The Christian masses. I'm not using it in that sense. The church is often viewed in these places in a negative light, often because of colonialism. For example, in China, Cuba, Nicaragua, even though those places obviously have liberation theology as a foundation, I can understand why there would be any sort of animosity towards an organized religion that, in one hand, and the Western colonial powers in the other, enslave them, enslave the native population, erased the native religions there as well, erased the native African religions that they used for the transatlantic slavery. And let's not forget that the church, the Catholic Church, was the one that requested the start of the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't Spain, it wasn't England, it was the Catholic Church that demanded it, actually. That any sort of animosity they have towards that, I understand to a degree. Similar to in Russia, right? You may not understand it, but the Russian Orthodox Church was very much also a feudal lord in a sense, similar to like the idea that the Pope at one time was the largest landowner in Europe, right, Gary? Like the Russian Orthodox Church was one of the largest landowners in Tsarist Russia, was heavily involved in serfdom, which is a deeply exploitative and oppressive class structure. And also the church was heavily involved with the what do you call it? The increase of anti-Semitism at the time. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was created in conjunction with Russian Orthodox Church. And so that wave of anti-Jewish pogroms that hit Tsarist Russia that killed really an untold amount. We really don't have a consensus about how many people died during those pogroms in the early 1900s and late 1800s. But the Russian Orthodox Church was very much a key figure for that happening. So when you have the serfs, the masses rise up, I can see why there's animosity towards not a religion, but a landowner, a lord, a feudal lord, because that's in effect what they were. I do also want to point out just maybe more of like a point of not hypocrisy, so to speak, but the idea that organized churches, especially mega church corporations, should just get carte blanche where they go. The Hillsong United documentary just came out. Watched that last night. We're talking about a massive multi-billion-dollar corporation that has a front of a church that the owners are handed down via nepotism, and they use the parishioners' money to go on private jets, to buy Cartier watches, let alone the sexual abuse that goes on, let alone the Catholic Church that had and still probably has issues of sexual abuse, right?
Can I just chime in real quick? If you want to sit here and kind of bash the Catholic Church, we can do that together.
I know.
Like, I'd be glad to join you in that, right? Like you keep saying the Catholic. Yeah, no, I agree, and that's why it has nothing to do with Christ. I agree with you. I'm with you 100%.
But for this point, we should separate the two, because the Cuban communists or the Russian communists or whoever we're talking about, they have very different views on what, especially in Latin America, they call Comrade Jesus, compared to the organized corporate front, so to speak, of we have these mega churches, right? And the Catholic Church is like the mega of mega churches. I know you're not a fan of them. I know you're more of the at-home Bible book study type. I get that completely, Gary.
Well, in Texas, have you been to North Texas?
Of course,
we have churches.
Amarillo.
Well, no, North Texas is that's West Texas. It doesn't make any sense. That's West Texas, and I know it's the northernmost part of Texas. That's not North Texas. That's West Texas. I know it makes no sense. North Texas is where I live, the DFW Metroplex, right? And its surrounding areas. And I know that's east, but whatever. We have mega churches, but even like our non-mega churches, are still like